we're going to be looking at Jamaica Farewell, which is on page 7 of the How Leonard Guitar Method, Book 2, and Oh Mary Don't You Weep, which is on page 9 of Book 2. Now, Jamaica Farewell features the use of syncopation, which is a new idea that was introduced on the preceding page. The idea with syncopation is that you combine downbeats with offbeats. So instead of just playing something as a 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, and things like that, you will have rests and quarter notes tied to other quarter notes or tied to eighth notes, or eighth notes tied to quarter notes, etc. So that you create rests and spaces in the music, and also put some of the accents on the backbeat. The backbeat is the and when you're counting. So if you're doing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, the downbeat is on the 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, the backbeat is on the ands, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So for instance, with Jamaica Farewell, we are starting with 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 goes on from there. So we will take a deeper look at Jamaica Farewell here in a minute. Oh Mary Don't You Weep is the other piece. This is in the key of D. We are also still using syncopation, so eighth notes tied to quarter notes, eighth notes tied to half notes, and so on. Eighth notes tied to other eighth notes. To do the same thing, to create a rest or to offset where the beat is. So you create backbeats, you create rests in the middle of spaces where you don't want to clutter it up with other rests. So Oh Mary Don't You Weep is also in the key of D, which is a new concept. I'll put a little thing up there about the key of D, but we have dealt with the key of G, which has one sharp, F sharp, so F, F sharp, F sharp, F sharp. Now with the key of D, we also have C sharp. So C, C sharp, right? C, C sharp. Okay? So syncopation, and now key of D. Jamaica Farewell is in the key of G major, and so our 1 sharp, which is different from the key of C, our 1 sharp is on F. So we go from F to F sharp. So we play, instead of there, we're playing there. Instead of here, we're playing here. Instead of there, we're playing there. In Jamaica Farewell, in the second measure, we have an F sharp. It's where we do which would actually be these 2 fingers. So F sharp. And then again, in the last measure of our second line, we have so again, F sharp twice in that one, just like the other one. Then the next time we play F sharp is in the second measure of our 4th line, just underneath the D7. So, again, so F sharps. In the key of G, F sharps. Okay, Jamaica Farewell. If we're looking a little more deeply into the first line than the first measure of the second line of Jamaica Farewell. Syncopation. We have eighth notes tied to quarter notes. Then we have eighth notes on downbeats next to quarter notes. So all of this is creating spaces, rests, where they're not actually rests, because on a rest you don't play, but it seems like a rest. But we're creating extra long notes that can be confusing with the ties, and we're also putting the rhythm on the backbeat when we have an eighth note on a downbeat, followed by a quarter note on the backbeat on the end. So in the first line, we have rhythm-wise 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and first measure, because we have quarter, eighth, eighth tied to a quarter, and then 2 quarters in a row. When you have an eighth tied to a quarter, the 2 notes together, when you have the tie, lasts as long as both of those notes, but you only play the first one. So we have the eighth on the end of 2 tied to a quarter note, which is on 3. So this takes up all of and 3 and takes up 3 beats, because you have a quarter, which is 2 eighth notes, and the eighth note at the beginning. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, and then in the next measure, the rhythm is exactly the same, but we're ascending up the scale, up our G. So again, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. In the third measure, we have 2 quarter notes and then 4 eighth notes, a straight ahead rhythm. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Then on the first measure of the second line, we have a eighth note followed by a quarter note, which creates, of course, eighth note is 1/8, quarter note is 2/8. Eighth note comes down on 1, quarter note is on and. So quarter note takes and 2, and then we have an eighth note tied to another quarter note, which comes in on the and. Okay, so keeping all of those things in mind, the first measure, the first bar and then the first measure of the second bar all come together like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and rest, 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 if they were eighth rests. Okay, continuing on with the second bar, we start the second measure of the second bar with a rest. Takes up all of 1, so that's 1 and. And then we have straight ahead, eighth notes, quarter note, eighth notes, 2 and 3 and 4 and. The last measure of that line, we have an eighth note followed by a quarter, and just like the first measure, the eighth note is on 1, and then the quarter comes in on 2, but a quarter note takes up 2 eighth notes. So that's and 2. Then the next note is an eighth note, which takes up 1 spot, so that's the and of 2. Then that eighth note is tied to another eighth note, so it acts like a quarter note. It takes up the space of 2 eighth notes. We only play the first one, we do not play the second one. 2 of them together last as long as the 2 of them together, but we only play the first one. And then we have 1, 2, 3 more eighth notes and 4 and. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Then when we get to the third line, we have a quarter note, 1 and. Then we have eighth notes, 2 and. The and of 2, that eighth note is tied to the next eighth note, in 3, and that's a pair of 8th notes for 3 and. So we only play the one on the and of 2. We count the one on 3, and then we play again on the and of 3. Then we have a quarter note on 4. That's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The rhythm for the next line is exactly the same. The next measure is exactly the same as the previous one. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The last measure, the 8th note on the and of 2 is tied to a quarter note. And so the 8th note and the quarter note together are 3 8th notes. So you play the note on the and of 2, and then we count and 3 and then we play the note on 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay? When you put those all together, it's going to look something like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, the fourth bar, the fourth line, we have a quarter note and 2 8th notes. Last 8th note is tied to a half note. So we play on the end of 2, and then we hold all the way through the end of that measure. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And then measure 2 of that bar, we have quarter note, 2 8th notes again. 8th note is tied to a quarter note, so that lasts for 3 8th notes. And then we have a quarter note at the end. This is just like the last bar of the third line, rhythm-wise. So this is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Final measure of this bar, we have 4 8th notes, 1 and 2 and. The and of 2 is tied to a quarter note, so that lasts for those 3 8th notes. We play on the and of 2, and 3 and then we have quarter note on 4 and. So that rhythm is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And then the final bar, there's a lot going on. So I will quickly say what 1, 2, 3, the fourth bar looks like. When you put it all together, it's going to look something like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The last line of Jamaica Farewell. Alright, we have quarter note, and then 2 8th notes, second 8th note, once again, which is the theme for Jamaica Farewell. Second 8th note is tied to the note, the downbeat of the next beat. This one's tied to 3. That happens a lot in here, right? The and of 2 is tied to 3, whether that is a quarter note, a half note, or an 8th note. In this case, it's an 8th note. So it lasts for 2 8th notes, and then we have 3 more 8th notes for and 4 and. So the rhythm of that first measure, of that last bar, is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The next one, underneath C, see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 8th notes. Once again, the and of 2, which is our theme here, is tied to a downbeat of 3. And then we have 4 more 8th notes. We have the one on 3, which we don't play because it's a tied note to the one before, and and 4 end for the rest of the eighth notes. So that second measure goes like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Second to last measure, we have 4 eighth notes and then 2 quarter notes straight ahead. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Then our ending measure, we have a quarter note, 2 eighth notes, last eighth note once again, and 2 is tied to the 3, and in this case the 3 is a half note. So this lasts the rest of that measure, 3 and 4 end. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, now when you put the whole thing together, it is going to look something like this.